Okay, hello and good evening, everyone. Especially a good evening to you if your Final Four bracket is still intact. Mine is not. That said, it is a perfectly beautiful evening here in Massachusetts. And so, as I'm looking out the window, as the other night, I had the opportunity, and it just looks like a dot, but I had the opportunity to watch the International Space Station go over. And so that's cool. It looks like a star going across, and I'm looking out the window and I'm looking at beautiful Massachusetts Bay. And so I'm thinking, what would you rather explore? Would you rather explore space, deep space, or the deep ocean? Where are you at on this Saturday evening? Even more kudos to all of you. As I've said in the past, those of you who are joining us tonight and have joined us in the past, as I've frequently said, if you're taking the time to go through this extra layer of studying, you're already in such a good position because you're taking the time to really, really commit to yourself and commit to your AP study. So good job. But if you're doing that on a Saturday afternoon, a Saturday evening, you should be particularly proud of yourself. That just means that you're putting that much extra effort in. So very, very good to welcome you all here today. And I look forward to doing this work with you in the next hour or so. Today, we're going to be taking a look at, this is a fiction unit this week in the first place, but even more so, it's meant to be a drama unit. We had done a little bit of fiction 2 weeks ago, and just given kind of shaking out some of the bugs as we got going with our CRAM season. We didn't quite get to some drama and some plays, and so I wanted to really double down on that this evening. And so we'll be doing that, but we'll also be taking a look at how to read quickly and with purpose. Okay, you want to make sure, as we start to get going with some of the skills that we can be working on in our AP work and on our AP test, we also want to think about some test taking etiquette and some test taking skills and some things that we can be doing to make the time that we have really, really efficient on the exam. So that's what we'll be doing this evening. As always, this is being recorded. We really, really encourage you. A big thank you to Gayatri, who's working on the chat with you all this evening, and so that's huge. Definitely make sure to drop in questions with her, of course. I'll be taking a look at the Q&A in general, but I do try to keep a good look at the chat. And so if there's anything that I am really, really not even coming close to hitting on, please put it in the Q&A. But I try to keep the chat open to make sure that you are to make sure that I'm following along with the questions that I'm asking, the answers that you're giving, and all the work that we're doing there together. But obviously, if you're asking a question, which we include, your name may be included here. So just be aware of that. And welcome to all those people. We definitely want you to keep that conversation going on our various social media. So be sure to take a look at that, of course, at Think Fiveable on all of our different platforms. Take a look there always. A few things coming up in the next few weeks. Next week, we'll keep going with some specific thesis writing. And we'll get back into a little bit of poetry and some more strategies there, as well as starting to get into, we're going to be looking at some multiple choice questions in general here, but as we start to look at different pieces of fiction, just kind of bouncing back and forth between different tips and tricks that we can be engaging with. So when we look at fiction and multiple choice tips and tricks, when we look at fiction and different strategies, a lot of that ends up being similar. But I'm trying to hopefully, as we get going here with a couple of different streams, as we start to build this community even more so than it has been over the course of the last few months. Again, a big thanks to Gayatri. We want to make sure that we're starting to build on some of those skills and seeing them put into practice in different ways with different readings from different time periods, different genres. Just trying to, a lot of this is looking at things, like plot and character and setting, and seeing them in different spaces and how they play with each other in different types of writing. Again, the more that we can do with different types of writing, the more that we can do with different media, just the better off you're going to be. So, do make sure to engage us. We try to keep it there's something to be for you at every different session that we run. We're trying to look at, one thing that builds on something from the week before. So we welcome you back to all of those. Tonight in particular, we want to take a look at a few mnemonic devices. We want to take a look at, what is it that you're particularly looking for? And when it comes down to it, I don't want to say, unlike something like a math or a science course where you can go back and check your work, we can't give you, the answers here, right? We're never going to be able to do that thing, but we can give you a sense of what we're seeing, what maybe other people in the stream are seeing as well, and trying to understand why we're pulling those things out. Okay, everything that you see on the exam is going to be purposeful. I really try to emphasize this every week. I try to emphasize it every day in my own classroom, and so we want to make sure that we are always looking at excerpts. Every piece is meaningful. It's just about, what is that meaning and what meaning can we make of it? Just because we end up saying that something is meaningful doesn't mean that what meaning we've given to it is the only possible meaning that it can have. So as we talk about what to look for this evening, more importantly, we're talking about, if we're pulling out an excerpt, what are we looking at in that excerpt, and can we find something similar in other spaces as well? And we'll be taking a look at some of those excerpts tonight. Now that we've given a few of those tools, one of the places that we're trying to build into tonight is to look at a couple of multiple choice examples. And then thinking about our drama excerpts, we'll be looking at FRQ2, an example of one of the open response excerpts that specifically was a piece of drama. And so we'll take a look at that and what we could say there as well. One thing that I want to, and maybe this is something that teacher you have has pointed to already, I want you to think about, when we think about, what are we looking at? What are we looking for? One of the things that you can remember, one of the mnemonic devices that you can remember is SOLID. SOLID stands for syntax, organization, level of language, imagery, diction, and details. Now, the thing that I always try to emphasize to my students, if we go through and I give them, maybe a graphic organizer or something, one of the things that maybe they get a little tripped up on, and maybe you're getting a little tripped up on it right even from the jump here. You don't necessarily need to be finding all of these things. In fact, maybe you don't even necessarily need to find any of these things. What we want to be aware of is that these are the sorts of things that you're looking for. And so let's talk about what they are. I suspect that you are aware of some of these. Maybe hopefully I'll say it in a way that's different than your teacher has said it already, though I suspect your teacher has in fact said it. Let's talk about syntax. Syntax, I think, is one of, I don't want to say it's the most important. I don't want to say it's my favorite. I just think it's something that you end up talking about anyway in any piece of writing that you're looking at all. Anything that you notice, you are likely noticing it because of syntax. So let's pause and really understand what syntax is in particular. In general, it's not just the order of words, it's the order of words including punctuation. So when you're looking at something quickly, you want to notice interesting punctuation. So maybe it's parentheses, maybe it's an em dash, maybe it's a colon or a semicolon. Maybe it's just a really long sentence that looks like a run-on, and maybe in some cases it is a run-on, but you're noticing it and you're noticing that it's long and you're asking yourself why. I think about an author like William Faulkner, who might be really writing really long sentences to engage vernacular, a style of writing in unique to a certain place or time, vernacular. And so we want to just make sure that we are looking at any weird, and I just used an example of a really long sentence. Maybe you find also suddenly short sentences. All of that is important. So it's the order of words in a sentence, including punctuation, including length, including style. Everything that goes into that sentence falls under kind of the heading of syntax there. Organization is usually over the course of a full excerpt, a full a full text. I think about a really good example of bizarre organization is perhaps The Handmaid's Tale, which is, as you sort of find out in the epilogue. So I'll try not to reveal too much if it's not something that you've read before and you intend to. It's something that the way the story has been organized is maybe not the way that the story was meant to be told. Obviously, that's a choice by Margaret Atwood. However the story is told is how the story is told. But there is something about a reliable or unreliable narrator that comes into question there. But so that's an example of writing over the course of a whole text, or that could impact the way the story is told, the way the story is organized. You're more than likely going to be thinking about a full excerpt because you have that text in front of you. The answers are right in front of you. So just thinking about, okay, what is the organization? What's the beginning, middle, and end of this full story? What's the beginning, middle, and end of this full excerpt? What can I take from this, and what is being revealed from the start of the excerpt to the end of the excerpt? I'll give an extra shout out, and I realize we're talking about fiction here tonight, but I'll give an extra shout out to that when it comes to poetry. You want to think about who the speaker is at the start of the poem, who the speaker is at the end of the poem, and what we learn about them along the way. But more than anything, those are the same questions you want to be asking yourself when it comes to various excerpts with fiction that you notice over the course of when it comes to over the course of a test. Taking a look at the level of language. Now, this is a place where my students get a little tripped up. You might be getting a little tripped up. That's okay. You want to be thinking about the level of language, not is it high, low, medium, not is it good or bad language, but rather as it relates to the context around it. The language you hear at your high school graduation is going to be different than the language you use in your maybe graduation party, right? And the language you use, let's put it a different way, the language you use in a speech is different than the language you use in a text to your friend. And so context matters. Language that makes sense in a space might be too high for just talking with your friends, and it might be really it might even be too high even for a speech, a more formal occasion. So thinking about language rather that is I think a lot about the word slang, and this is a conversation. I'm trying to say this in a way that isn't just channeling my students in particular, but this is a conversation that I did have with a student in particular this week. Slang we tend to think of as when we use it just in our everyday, we think of it as language that is not formal. We think of it as language that is maybe even uneducated, but that's not what slang means. Slang is language that is casual. That's more important. You can have slang between like a governor and their aide. They might use really casual language together. Maybe they wouldn't use that in a speech. Maybe they would use it in a speech. Maybe there's some language that is colloquial that makes more sense to use in a speech to better convey some sort of whatever that meaning may be. But the thing that's important about slang is that it indicates familiarity. It indicates the fact that people are coming into a space where they both belong and they both are familiar and they both know each other. So there's a casualty to that, or excuse me, a casualness to that. And so you wanna make sure that you're recognizing that low level and high level language are not necessarily good or bad. They just indicate the space. Imagery we've talked about a lot, but I always like to talk about imagery as language that engages the senses and gives gradients. It shows small differences. Diction is word choice, strong words, odd words, words that not it and the and a, but thinking about words that that stand out to you because they are unique to a piece of writing, stand out to you because they're just what we might call a $2 word, a really really good word. So be thinking there, and then details. Again, thinking back to what do we learn from the beginning to the end of this excerpt. What does it ultimately mean that we're reading this passage? Tonight in particular, we're going to look at syntax, level of language, diction, and details. You're going to see imagery. In terms of what we can offer you in this space, organization, I'll try to point out, but you'll see you won't even necessarily need to look at organization on an excerpt too frequently outside of FRQ2, and so we'll take a look at that. We'll mention that a little bit later, but in particular, I want to point out interesting syntax, interesting language, and interesting diction, and how it contributes to those details overall. The second thing I want to help for you, because I know a couple of people have asked about some tips for reading within the time, for working within the time, and for annotating within the time, be it on your FRQs or even on your multiple choice section. I also, and I'm going to specifically call out a student in our poetry unit 2, the poetry 1 course or CRAM last week. Someone had asked about some tips related to the online version of the exam. I want to just take a moment to point out, and I had gone back and looked through this, really trying to find some specific tips and tricks for the online exam. Unlike some of the other content, the online and paper versions of the lit test are pretty much the same. Is what the AP is telling us. I had been looking for my own purposes and for my own class. The school that I'm at, we're going to be doing the paper exam, and so I'd been focusing on that for my purposes. So I did go back and look in particular for fiveable purposes, and they are in fact the same. And so what I'll say to you there is to still make sure, have a piece of paper next to you, jot these things down, make your own organizers, the same way that you would on a workbook in particular. But I want to call out this slide in particular because for all of you, you want to be, if you're asking about how to work efficiently, this is one way. Now, you might call these the 5 S's of skimming, but I suspect that that's probably confusing and it might be hard to remember. So I've made up my own little acronym here. It doesn't mean anything, but I suspect you'll remember HYPIE, HYPIE. And so that's the second letter instead of just S. That's the second letter of each of these words here. So shift, syntax, speaker, situation, and sentences. These are things you can be looking at to help you try to recognize important details quickly when you're skimming through a text. This could be a poem. This could be an excerpt, a longer excerpt from a work of fiction. And I suspect in many cases you'd want to think about it in terms of fiction. You obviously poems are likely going to be a little bit shorter, a little bit more digestible, and you have some other things that can offer. So let's take a look at these quickly. Looking at H, shift. What's changing? And I know and again, I'll call back poetry quickly. I know in a poetry there are specific shifts that you want to call out, and you know that. But when it comes to a shift in a piece of fiction writing, what is changing, if anything? Is the point of view changing? Is the voice changing? Is there a change in mood or focus in the text? Is there something that you're learning a little bit more fully maybe in the second half of the text that you didn't quite learn in the first half of the text? Is there something that you suspected that is then confirmed halfway through the text, if that might be it? Syntax, again, we just pointed out, can you find any of that syntax? Do you see that punctuation or longer words versus shorter words? Is there any variety in the writing style that you can point out? Who is speaking? The speaker is third. And as we've talked about in past crams, who are they as a character? What is their motivation? What are they bringing to this scene? What are they bringing to the excerpt? And more importantly, what is the scene? What is the excerpt? What is the plot that you're recognizing? Again, the test isn't just scrolling through whatever book they happen to grab and picking, and just like flipping open to page 109, pointing to a paragraph and saying that's going on the test. They have deliberately curated those excerpts for you. So what's the situation? What's the conflict and the motivation? What can you take from it? And then one of the ways, and I'll tell you, this is something that was pointed out to me 3 years ago. This type of quick reading structure, and I'll tell you, it's actually helped me to think through various excerpts as I'm talking to them with my students in general. What's the first sentence? What's the last sentence? And if you're asking yourself, well, how do we get from one to the other? As you scan through the rest of the paragraph, what's going on along the way? So in any given section, look at the first sentence, look at the last sentence. In any given paragraph, look at the first sentence, look at the last sentence. What's going on along the way? Now, before we get into this, we are obviously, we're about 20 minutes in here. I know I've thrown a lot at you. Just a quick recap. We're looking for solid. That's going to help us to scan. Again, all of these things, we're trying to work through any of these excerpts quickly, but efficiently. And efficiently means being able to move with speed, but purposeful speed. And so remembering things like solid, and remembering you don't need to know everything that's in that space, remembering these 5 S's, this HYP, can you move through a text in an efficient way? That's more important when it comes to what it is that you're reading, be it the multiple choice section or one of the FRQs. It's not about speed, it's about efficiency, because that's going to bring accuracy into it. And as always, remember, I'm trying to give you some tools to put in your toolbox, but more importantly, the test graders are trying to score you for what you do well. So these tools, they're just another way to help you to be able to show what you can do well. So let's take a look at some of this work that we can look at this evening. The first, I've moved through this quickly. I moved off of this quickly. Let's come back to it for a second. Let's think about solid. Let's think about syntax, language, diction. This is from Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, and you'll notice quickly if you're scanning through this, in terms of organization, which again, I said we weren't going to look at too deliberately tonight, but quickly in terms of organization, you see one really short line, one longer line, and I have cut it off, but one shorter line, a longer line, a third shorter line, and I've cut that off a little bit. It's still a pretty short line. More importantly, I want to take a look at this. I want to take a look at this bit of stage direction. It's one of my favorite pieces of stage direction, and I don't want to make it seem like I have favorite pieces of everything, but in particular, I really like Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, and I really like what Tennessee Williams does in it, because it's one of the only spaces in literature that we really truly get to see what it is that the author is thinking, what it is that they're bringing to the space. Even before the play, or before, if you're reading the hard copy text, even before anything begins, Williams has really laid out what the scene should look like, what the stage should look like. There's a bed in the middle. There's a liquor cabinet off to the side. There's a few windows onto a veranda that people can walk in and out. There are doors connected to everything. But about halfway through the text, Brick and his father. Brick is our main character. If you've ever seen the play, if you've ever seen the most popular film version, he's played by Paul Newman. Brick and his father is played by the voice of the snowman in Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, if anyone's interested in that. But as he takes a look at this stage direction, they're in this argument. And as we're taking a look at this, Williams has told the actor exactly how to perform the piece, but he's also taking us into why the actor should be performing a piece in such a way. And so let's take a moment to read through that. I'm going to open up one of our first polls of the evening and take a moment just to think about what is it that Williams believes about Brick in this moment. So take a moment to read through there. What is it that Williams believes about Brick that the performer portraying Brick should bring to the scene? Take a moment. I've put this up on the screen. I don't want to take too long with this as we're scanning through for various interesting syntax, as we're scanning through for interesting level of language, and as we're scanning through for interesting diction. I don't want to get us. I don't want to block us off from this with the poll. But let's take a moment here as we look. Those of you who are weighing in, and feel free to continue weighing in, those of you who are jumping in here have pointed to the more important word, that there's resignation. Not necessarily that Brick is resigned. Brick definitely should be resigned. And I'll pull this off for just a moment. There are so many interesting pieces and interesting words that come to this if we're reading it at all, but if we're reading it using or looking for some solid here. In terms of the level of language, it starts to there's some interesting words that come up here that we can probably more attribute to. We'll call it a pretty straightforward level of language. Let's focus on some diction. Pardon me. I went to point to disavowed and I clicked on it. Disavowed, mendacity. One of the words that I point to the most, one of the sentences rather that I point to the most is about 2/3 of the way down here. Some mystery should be left in the revelation of character in a play, just as a great deal of mystery is always left in the revelation of character in life, even in one's own character to himself. So there's an interesting bit of syntax because that comma right at the end, just before the end here, adds this appositive phrase, even in one's own character to himself. Some mystery should be left in the revelation of character in a play. Williams is sort of waxing poetic about how playwriting should be in the first place. But what is it that we're talking? But if that's true, and he's trying to sort of again, he uses this odd word and this odd bit of language. The bird that I hope to catch in the net of this play is not the solution of one man's psychological problem. That is an odd level of language. He's started to bring in some figurative language in a place that, and I appreciate the comment in the chat here. This long paragraph describes stage direction. We need to know what's supposed to be happening in the scene if we are the performers. And yet Williams seems to be speaking more to the audience than anything else. The bird that I hope to catch in the net of this play, that is, that is the bird rather here is anything or the purpose that Williams is hoping to address. And that one bird that he names is not the solution of one man's psychological problem. He's trying to catch the true experience of a group of people. It's a whole flock of birds, if that's what he's talking about. And so in a place where he should be very direct, he's actually being much more indirect. And so we learn a lot about, as we start to then pull back to what other details and what other word choice Williams is offering, that's ultimately going to help us to talk about the character Brick and the other characters surrounding Brick in the situation, as I named in part of our skimming here. So if we're skimming again, let's take a look at the first sentence and the last sentence. Brick's detachment is at last broken through. Looking at the last sentence, which is a bit offset, so I've put in this little dash, this little slash at the end here. The following scenes should be played with great concentration, with most of the power leashed, held on to, captured, but palpable in what is left unspoken. So there's going to be a lot here that is unspoken that we need to read between the lines on. Now, I haven't given you that piece, and I will in some of the next scenes that we take a look at tonight. But as we take a look back here throughout the rest of this, Williams is talking more about the human condition and how Brick is a part of that makes things really purposeful in this leashed scene. And so as we scan back through this, what is it that is probably not going to be said? What is it that is being leashed? What is it that is being resigned, as we looked at in the poll? And so now we look back at some syntax. And as we're scanning quickly trying to find some syntax, we notice about the middle of the paragraph here, a little more than middle, we see not just some em dash, we see an exclamation point, and we see some really, really strong language. We see some diction. That cloudy, flickering, evanescent, fiercely charged interplay of live human beings in a thundercloud of common crisis. Now, let's stop for a second, because without any of this, the play should likely speak for itself. I think about plays and poetries as any piece of art that the artist can put as much detail in, can take as much time as they want, playing and adapting and molding and crafting and doing whatever it is that they have to do. But by the time it gets to us, by the time it gets to the audience, it's like a child being raised, and that child needs to go walk on its own. And so by the time it gets to us, it is what we make of it. So without any of this detail, I suspect that Brick and Maggie's relationship, Brick and his father's relationship, will likely show itself. But Williams really wants us to know that, quote, he's trying to catch the true quality of experience in a group of people, that cloudy, flickering, evanescent, fiercely charged interplay of live human beings. He's both putting these performers into this interplay with one another. He's trying to get to that space with one another. But what it is that he's trying to portray comes through in Brick. Now, there's a lot in here. There's a lot in what we just said, and we can start to recognize when, if we're looking at solid, we can start to recognize how we notice it. Let's use the rest of our excerpts this evening to try to get a sense of what it is that we can make of those things. Let's skim here briefly in the opening stage direction of the play Fences by August Wilson. And as we take a look here, move that off. What is the mood, do you suppose, of this opening scene as you skim through it? So take a look. Remember, you're trying to look for any shifts, anything that changes. Taking a look at some interesting syntax if you find it. Trying to find now speaker doesn't necessarily matter in a bit of stage direction here, but we can think about the characters that are being offered to us. What is the situation? That's mostly that's mostly what I've tried to grapple with in our poll here. And just taking a look at the first and last sentence. You may choose to look at the first and last sentence of the whole piece. You could look at the first and last sentence of each paragraph. What is it that you're ultimately getting as you look at those first and last sentences? And really, I'd actually suggest you do that first. I realized I put it at the end of this. It doesn't necessarily matter. You're ultimately going to realize things as you try. It's not about the order so much as it is about trying to recognize each of those pieces. One thing that I've tried to capture here, and I have a handful. I appreciate those people taking a look at our poll here and trying to offer a little bit of feedback. If that's not where you're at, not a big deal. As long as you're taking a look here, trying to work through and scan through this stage direction whatever way you can. Let's take a look at some of them. What do we suppose is the mood of this opening scene? We'll give just another moment. For those people who have added in here, I'd offer that, one thing that I've tried to do here a little bit, and on the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about some actual AP questions that we can work through. As we take a look at this opening scene, I've also tried to add something that might give you a little bit of a sense of what an AP question can look like. And obviously, I suspect you've looked at some anyway on your own that are a little bit more deliberate. To take a look at this word relaxed, so it definitely is relaxed. It's Friday night. I think one of the most important things, if we're trying to scan for important sentences, it's Friday night, payday. And the one night of the week that the two men engage in a ritual of talk and drink. When it comes to syntax, that's an important sentence. It's Friday night, comma, payday, comma. And the one night of the week, and then that's a detail here, one night of the week that the two men engage in, I'll add this bit of diction, the ritual. Not tradition, not practice, but the ritual. It's something that happens every week of talk and drink. Okay, so it's Friday night, And I suspect, if you yourself were probably, got out of school yesterday, or if you had something, I know a couple of places have some sporting events that might have been that might have been unable to be completed during the fall season, given the pandemic, but maybe they've started to come back here in the spring. So maybe your Friday night was a little bit busy, but now it's Saturday and you're relaxed. Maybe it's Friday and you got to go to that sporting event and you were more relaxed. Regardless, it's Friday. It's the end of the week. Stuff is out. And not only is the week out, but it's a good feeling to get that paycheck. It's like re-upping your bank account. It's like re-upping. It's like putting a little bit more gas in the tank. It's like getting a full charge on your phone. Things are there's a weight that's lifted. There's no responsibilities right now. He gets to go home. Troy and Bono here, they get to go home. They get to relax with each other. They don't necessarily have any cares for right now. Now, in terms of Troy, he's gonna do some choring on Saturdays. That's what his Saturday is gonna look like. So he does have something to do the next day. But Friday night, Friday's payday. Friday's relaxed. Friday is not just relaxed, but it's always relaxed. There's a ritual that happens here. So that's what we can get in that third paragraph there. But there's also a few things that change in the course of these three paragraphs. In terms of solid, though, and we'll talk about skimming through it a little bit in a second, but in terms of solid, the level of language is one of the things that shifts. It's Friday night, and the one night of the week, it's Friday night. Troy is usually the most talkative, and at times he can be crude and almost vulgar, though he is capable of rising to profound heights of expression. So I want to take a minute to look at that sentence. Troy is usually the most talkative, and at times he can be crude and almost vulgar. It's an interesting bit of syntax, but let's talk about, as I always say, the so what. We notice that there's an interesting sentence here, but so what? In the first half of that sentence, we get a little bit of characterization. Troy is the most talkative. We also, if we look back, if we know that he's the one who's talkative and dominating the conversation, then we can also look back at the second paragraph and say of the two men, Bono is obviously the follower. So Troy, talkative and domineering, maybe. Bono, Bono rather, is the follower, and he's quieter. There's a parallel between the two. And then as we continue on in this sentence, that for what it's worth includes the word and twice. And so that's a bit of syntax, just looking at how those clauses play together. Troy is usually the most talkative, and at times he can be crude and almost vulgar, which if we're looking at these two characters as parallels, if we're looking at these two characters as contrasts, then if Troy is crude and vulgar, Bono is not that. Bono is more of a person who might be a little bit more meek, enlightened, a little bit headier, but Troy is also capable of rising to profound heights of expression. Now, profound and expression, in fact, the phrase profound heights of expression it's something that level of language is higher than talkative, crude, and vulgar. And so to see the way that Wilson, in terms of the words that he's choosing, elevates the level of language in terms of elevating how he talks about his character is important as well. And that's one of those spaces where when it comes to Williams, when it comes to August Wilson, both of them have done this. They've added something in here that helps us to understand who those characters should be were we the performers playing them. So even in the actual stage direction, it's become important. We're moving through here. If you take a look, I do want to make sure that I give you the space to get the fullest feeling of some of these multiple choice questions. So let's take a moment, and I'll get this up in a second. You can see on here, I've included a tiny URL if you'd like to type that in somewhere. I believe this is also available in Discord for you, or will be. If you can, take a look. You can also scan with a phone by opening your camera and scanning that QR code. Something should drop down at the top of your phone screen to be able to look at the full excerpt here. But I've tried to pull out the important pieces that are mentioned in this excerpt. We have this excerpt between Richard and Mildred in a play. And as we're taking a look here, the question is, together with the stage direction, as we've talked about all night with the stage direction, together with the stage direction, Mildred's words, so now we've added in a little bit of that dialogue. Mildred's words in line 9, from well to for you. So that's this piece in here. Well, if you don't solemnly swear you won't, then I won't give you, then I won't give you something I've got for you. And then the line, so we see this question together, there's the stage direction, and then we have the actual spoken line, well, I guess, and then down the bottom here, you can piece that together. What does this suggest about Mildred? Now, this is not exactly the question that we asked when it came to Brick. This is not exactly the question that we discussed as we looked at Troy and Bono entering the yard, but it is something where we've added in what the author is trying to bring in versus what is actually bring in terms of stage direction versus what is actually spoken by the characters and the performers. So take a look at these two pieces, and obviously you can see on the left-hand side the line numbers. You can see at the bottom of this excerpt the italicized stage direction to try to blend this word together that comes in the question. Take a moment to read through that on your own, and I'll open up a poll to let you try to answer this question on your own. Now, as a little treat, which is just to say that I only had 4 options rather than 5, we can ignore the option E, knowing that A, B, C, D are one of those is the actual right answer. But we'll take a look at E just to know exactly what's sort of not happening there as well. And as we take a look here, we've had, for what it's worth, people taking advantage of our poll space this evening. All came to be excellent work there. That is, in fact, our correct response. And let's take a look at, first off, this level of surprise is really the word that ultimately comes into play when it comes to Mildred for E. That's not necessarily what's happening. She knows what's happening. And we know that she knows because of the stage direction up at line 9, quote, with suppressed excitement. As we look through the rest of these options, looking at B, which you all correctly chose, Mildred, quote, enjoys teasing Richard about his love life. That suppressed excitement that eliminates E is the same suppressed excitement that kind of tips the hand to the fact that she is someone who is who is kind of, a kidder and a teaser, as well as the word laughing in line 21. The fact that Richard is trembling with eagerness. Mildred watches him curiously, then sighs effectively, and tells us, gee, it must be nice to be in love like you are. So we've seen how If we were to just watch a play, we'd hope to be able to get a lot of what it is that we're getting from the characters. We'd hope that the performers are bringing this to us, and we'd be able to say it on our own. But really, looking at it as an AP student, looking at it as a literature student, these are things that the author is giving to us because they must give them to the performers. And so that's where it is that we're doing the work of both seeing and feeling and analyzing and bringing all of that together and recognizing that all of these words really are purposeful together. So one of the things that you may inadvertently do as you're trying to read quickly is maybe avoid some of the stage direction. Now, if it came to the word breathlessly here as you're reading and just, for homework, maybe you scan over that and you just miss it. You probably wouldn't skip over the big parenthetical from the Tennessee Williams slide. You probably wouldn't skip that. You'd see that there's a huge chunk of paragraph. You'd see that there's a lot to talk about, and that stands out. So you probably wouldn't scan over that. But it's really important to know that when you're looking at on this slide in particular, where we have a question written by the AP, where we have a question that touches in on some stage direction, and it's really brief stage direction, making sure that we recognize how much every single word matters is super important. I'm going to take a minute here. I want to jump into a couple of other questions here. I want to skip ahead just because we are at, with about 10 minutes left here in our evening together. I want to take some time to look at these questions and at these multiple choice questions with you, because I know that that's something that you've been sharing in the Discord, and I want to make sure that I'm offering that to you. So let's look at that practice here once more together, and I'll open up a poll here. It's the same play. Again, if you've already scanned that QR code or that tiny URL, you can just have that open again for the full effect of the text. But let's take a look at this question. What is the shifting tone of Richard's dialogue in line 24 between huh and act? So this whole piece that I've given you down the bottom here. What does it reveal about his character? And I'll open up the poll in a second. I'll pause for a moment in terms of showing the actual results in the question on screen, just because it will block off that bit of text, and I don't want to do that to you. But take a moment here. We're actually a little divided on some of our votes that have been coming in. So let's take a look just briefly. Pardon me. That we have, excuse me, clicking too many buttons here. That we have B, C, and D. So let's take a look at each of those. We'll ignore A for the moment. Let's take a look at B, C, and D. He's concerned with maintaining others' opinions of, he's concerned with maintaining others' opinions of him. He's sincere in his affection for Muriel. His emotions can be swayed easily by circumstances. Now, I am right there with you. This is one of those places that I feel the test can be a little tricky. I read that and I say, if we're judging the character, if we're doing some analysis of this character, I agree with you. His emotions do feel like they can be swayed here. He doesn't feel like he's very sincere. But I think part of this, but I think more importantly, all of it is coming from the correct answer, B. He's concerned with maintaining others' opinions of him. Now, if someone is concerned with what others think, likely his affection might be easily swayed, and that could call into question his sincerity. So I think that all of those definitely feel true. I think when we look to the correct answer, B, that he's concerned with maintaining others' opinions, he's someone who's trying to bolster himself. The purpose of all of this text and all of this tone is that he lacks confidence in himself, and he lacks confidence in who he is around people. So he's trying to struggle to convince people that he's right. And so that's why I actually chose this, is because it is a tricky question. Um, because it feels like all three of the answers that were selected here, B, C, and D, all feel right, but I think they stem from uh, option B, that he is concerned with maintaining others' opinions of him. The last thing I want to touch on before we move on this evening is some FRQ practice that I promised. And so let's take a minute to talk through here this question. And again, this is a different excerpt. This is the Brighton Beach Memoirs by Neil Simon. So feel free to punch in that tiny URL or scan the QR code. I might, just in the last few moments of the evening, definitely do that, because obviously I haven't really proved, it's a much longer excerpt than what I was able to give you on the multiple choice here. So I would really take a moment to have that available for yourself. Look at that, even if you just take a picture of this slide so you can copy the tiny URL later, take a look at that right now, so that way we can keep doing that work. So as we take a look at this scene, and hopefully you've pulled this up, as we take a look at this scene, let's talk through what some of the important things might be to grab hold of as we focus not only on a strong thesis, but on a sophisticated thesis to help us write a sophisticated essay. In the passage, two sisters discuss their family and living situation. Both of those are going to become apparent to you as you read through the excerpt. The older sister Nora wishes to leave home and become an actress, but needs her Uncle Jack's permission. So when it comes to the question, the two sisters discuss their family and living situation, we actually come into a place where we have a family situation with Uncle Jack. As you read the passage carefully, think about how you can write a thesis statement that you might use for an essay that analyzes how Simon, our author, uses literary elements and techniques to inform the reader's understanding of Nora's complex motivations. Then write a paragraph. This is again just a bit of a practice excerpt. So you might write a paragraph. You might write a whole essay. I've pulled that from there. Think about the thesis though. We have a few pieces, if you're looking at this right now, we have a few pieces to think about. In the opening, in some of the opening stage direction, Nora's sister sits on a twin bed across from her. So even in the staging, we have something there's some parallel that has been created, just as we saw with Troy and Bono. Nora is crying, and so there's something clearly poor has happened. As we move through the actual question itself, as we think about our family dynamic and family situation, we start to think about, we start to recognize that Nora's memory of her father is different than her sister's. Both of them have a relationship with their mother that feels kind of stuck and futile. But more importantly, all we see in this excerpt is Nora and her sister. And we learn about Uncle Jack, we learn about the mother, and we learn about the living situation, and we learn about the father, all from what they bring into it. And they being an extension of the author Simon here. If we're trying to think about some of these other implicit details, the only way we're going to get that is by thinking through, interesting bits of syntax, interesting shifts. There's a whole big paragraph. There's two whole paragraphs in the middle here that are much longer than the others. So we're going to point those out. There are there are there's a casual level of language here, so we don't necessarily worry about that. But the details that are included both in the stage direction and in the way they reminisce on their family situation, all of that comes together in a way that helps us to understand this question. And so when we think about when we think about our thesis, we will focus in more deliberately with our next time together working on fiction. We want to start to think about, if we never use the word motivation as the prompt gives us, if we never use the word literary elements, which the prompt gives us, if we never actually talk specifically about the two sisters, can we still talk about all the other members of the family? And the answer is yes. The answer is yes, because Simon has given us enough to know and enough to work on both in the stage direction and these descriptions that we can get through all of that work in a way that helps us to really elevate the way that we analyze any passage. And that comes from scanning for important details and understanding what types of details we're looking for. And so I hope that this has been helpful for you this evening. We will talk about that more specifically in about 2 weeks when we come back together for some more fiction work. But the things that you want to think about is that when you're thinking about characters, think about their motivation. What are they bringing to each scene? Remember, motivation is not necessarily what it is that they're striving for in any given time, but what it is that they're bringing into the scene, and what they're, sort of who's taking the lead in the scene. What are they working towards, and what's being revealed to us? Remember that as you're scanning through, especially on the chest, those parentheses matter because there's so much in the stage direction. I didn't say this, but plays are contained within 2 hours. This information is important. The actors and actresses and performers might be bringing something to you as an audience, but the author is bringing something to you in every piece of language. So if ultimately you're feeling it as a reader, if you're feeling it as an audience member, it means that the performers are meant to feel it too, and they're trying to bring that to you. So really try to name it and pull that out in as sophisticated a way as you can. Again, I want to be reminding you to join us again next week for some more fiction, and we'll be working on that, and we'll be working on some thesis work. But as well, tomorrow evening, we'll be looking back at some trivia regarding, based on this evening. And I always want you to make sure that you're checking in with us on our various social media platforms. So there's that @ThinkFiveable tag again. Make sure that you do keep this conversation going with one another, with Gayatri, over the course of this evening and this weekend. More importantly, thank you all for taking the time this evening and on the weekend to look through some of this work. If there are things that you are more and more interested in, if it was more helpful for you tonight to be looking at some of those multiple choice excerpts, definitely shout that out, and we'll try to keep that in mind as we continue to curate this for you over the course of the next few weeks. But I hope that the blend of multiple choice, FRQs, and various excerpts was helpful to you tonight. Definitely try to keep talking about that on Discord. All that said, have a very restful Saturday night. Have a very restful weekend, and we'll talk to you all next week. Have a good night, everyone.